Hello everyone, welcome to this week's practice group meeting. The title is Guide Specs and Product Representation. We have three presenters for you today. We have Nina Giglio, David Proudfit, and Thad Goodman here to present for you. Also, anyone who would feel free, or we would like to encourage anyone to do some live tweeting from the event, please feel free to use the hashtag TrustCSI, which you'll see in the bottom right corner of your screen. And now, without further ado, Nina, if you'd like to begin.
Great. Thank you so much, Rob. Good afternoon to all of you. We are glad you were able to join us. I know that guide specifications and product representation is an important topic to all of us, and we each, between Thad, myself, and David, we all kind of represent similar and yet very different viewpoints, and so we look forward to having this dialogue. This is also meant as kind of a teaser to a couple of upcoming events, one of those being the CSI Academies, and the other event being this guide specification workshop that will be in May, and we'll be wrapping up and talking about those a little bit more. As Robert indicated, we encourage you to go on and ask some questions as we go. Feel free, and Rob will interject on those, and we'll see if we can answer and get some good dialogue going. So let's go on and go over to the next slide, if we would, Rob, since you're driving. And just a little bit about manufacturer's guide specs. A couple of years ago we did a presentation for CSI on 10 tips, and there have been a number of presentations on guide specifications writing, and so we wanted to talk a little bit today about where do good guide specs come from, and just some good some points to maybe think about as you're either reviewing your own manufacturer guide specs or as you're looking to maybe put those together. One thing before we get to talking about manufacturer guide specs, and both Thad and Dave, please, I can run for an hour, so please feel free to jump in at any point as well and just bump me over. But I want to talk a little bit about the difference between manufacturer guide specs and more commercially available guide specs. Certainly, manufacturer guide specs, as their names, come from manufacturers and typically are provided to the design professionals to assist us in our practice. Similarly, commercially available guide specs, which may come from BSD, ARCOM, SpecTex, there's any number of resources that are out there, may be a little bit more generic in purpose, but I think one thing that as design professionals and as manufacturers reps we need to consider is one of their names is guide specs. And so while some people may drop them directly into their project manual and say, I'm done with it, I think we need to remember that these are guides and used as tools. So Dave or Thad, would you like to add anything on to that?
Yeah, in a way, the way I see it a little bit may not necessarily be true, but a manufacturer's guide specification I see as, and obviously is a proprietary specification, whereas maybe a commercial availability guide specification such as BSD or master spec is a little more non-proprietary. It has many different manufacturers in there. It can be written totally non-proprietary. And so, you know, as a specifier, yes, I expect a manufacturer's guide spec to be a proprietary specification. I mean, that's why you're doing it, to get your product specified. So we expect that, and they should be written specific to your product.
Thad, from the manufacturer standpoint, and I know that some of your specifications are written proprietary, but I also know that some of them are a little bit more open-ended. Do you want to add anything onto that?
Yeah, just real quickly, CSI has provided a service in the past, and there's other people as well. There's people in the industry that will look over your guide specs. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But to Dave's point, there's going to be information there that's proprietary, you know, names of your products and those sort of things, and that's totally acceptable. It should be presented as generically as possible in the context of a three-part spec, and the way that it should look if you were just one of the members of that. I think that that's a great way from a manufacturer standpoint to give the architect a comfort level to understand, all right, here's a product of where it should be. Now let me do a little research on it. So that's a piece of it. I will mention one other thing about the more generic specs, master specs, BSD, those sort of things. As a manufacturer, it behooves you to look at those products and know exactly what they look like. I had a situation recently where I had an architect who was asking me about 3 or 4 of our different products, and I didn't quite understand the nomenclature until she sent me a copy of the actual master spec she was looking at. Then I understood the generic terms that they were using, and it just made it so much easier to drop in normal. Then we had a completely different discussion, because then we were talking apples to apples.
That's an excellent point, and really kind of goes into the first bullet point on the slide, which is utilizing good specifications practices. And if you're going to have or you currently have a guide spec, or you're looking at preparing one, you want to make sure that you're utilizing good specification practices, because there's one thing, and I think, Dave, you'd back me up on this, that probably aggravates the specifications community at large, is having a specification, a manufacturer's specification, that really doesn't look anything like what CSI indicates good specification practices are. And so I've indicated just 3 things here that you want to consider, and that's the 4 C's, which are clear, complete, concise, and correct. And while that may seem like it's a no-brainer, it's amazing the information that's out there on the web. And of course, if it's on the web, it must be true. But you want to try to stick to the CSI guiding principles and consider, if you don't have a copy of the practice guides, there's good information on how to prepare good specifications. Also, the using terminology, and Thad, to your point, I think that the fact that we all call things a little bit different. And I know that in a large office as I'm in currently, getting people to use the same term for a very common material can be very difficult, and we seem to always be speaking different languages. So I think those are just 3 touched on points that you want to consider when you're looking at your guide specification to put it out, because those are things that specifiers are going to be looking at.
That's right. I'm an independent specifier, and if you want me to use your product and use your specification, I obviously want it to be in 3-part format. Nothing worse when I see a specification from a manufacturer that's got 6, 7, 8, or 9 parts, and I'm trying to weed through it and find out what I can use in my specification. A good guide specification in CSI 3-part format will get used more by me than one that isn't. My goal is make my life easier. So if you have a good specification out there, you're more likely to get a good shot at getting into my specification.
We had received a question previously about this, and the question, and Dave, if you maybe take the lead on this, is, do firms generally appreciate a full 3-part guide spec or simply a product schedule? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm an independent specifier, so I work for, write specifications for other architectural firms, but I myself prefer the specification and not just a schedule. That way I know how it all fits into the regular specification. Obviously, I rarely, if ever, have taken a specification from a manufacturer and just downloaded it into my project manual. I always just take parts and pieces from it anyway, but if I can see it and it's full, that way I know where to take and put things. I have worked with some companies, and there are some manufacturers out there that take that to a different level, where they would just provide the actual paragraphs that would go into a formatted CSI specification, in which case they've done their homework, know what those paragraphs are and how they fit into a standards formatted specification, and those aren't bad either. So either one of those 2 methods, but just a listing of things, although it's okay, I don't particularly like that route. I'd like to go where I can see the spec and how it's going to fit into my project manual.
And I would certainly agree with you as well. And I oftentimes will look just to see how they lay it out. What are the things that you as the manufacturer felt were, what are the characteristics that you felt were important to include in your guide specification? So I too would really prefer to see a full three-part guide spec, because then I can also equate it to where I need to put things. That doesn't mean that a product schedule isn't also appropriate to have, but I think this may be dependent upon what your product is or what you're trying to convey. You may need to provide both, because sometimes there are characteristics that are certainly better to schedule, and I want to be able to look at that. So when you're developing your product literature, make sure you realize that your audience is not always the design professional that's drawing the pretty pictures, or we all have different roles to play, and I'm much more, while I like the pretty pictures, I'm much more interested in the technical information. So you have to have a good balance to that. Thad, do you have anything to add on to that?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, Nina, and Dave said the same thing in essence. There are different types of products out there that we consider in the manufacturing world guide specs. You know, if I mentioned earlier about putting it in a three-part format so that the architect that's looking at it can say, okay, in this particular part of my specification, here's a product that I have an opportunity to look at. Then we also have what we call spec briefs or guide shorts, and that's a more complex part where it has the information that's similar to what Dave was talking about, where it basically expands upon some of those benefits and characteristics as they relate to the other things in the assemblies around them. You know, this one covers better. This has a fuller mat, so it covers better in an application for an air barrier. This one is for a water management system. Here's something that's a little better, because there are lots of general ASTMs out there, as you both know, lots of general ASTMs out there that can meet a certain spec, but then there's characteristics within that you're typically looking for performance on a specific project. Does that make sense?
Excellent points. Excellent points. Good. Well, staying on that same theme of how we use information, the third bullet item on the slide that we're looking at says a guide spec won't sell your product. Oftentimes, a lot of people seem to think that the guide spec is going to make me buy product. Well, as a specifier, Dave and I don't buy much in the way of products. And so we also want to have you be able to utilize your guide spec as a tool, but don't consider it to be the point that it's going to sell. By the time that a specifier is typically looking at a guide spec, and Dave, you please jump in here and let me know if you disagree here, but by the time I'm looking at a guide specification, the product has probably been pretty closely selected, and now I'm looking for the characteristics. And so you have to understand how that spec is going to be used. Dave?
That's right. I mean, in essence, hopefully you all have been in to see your architect before that and worked with him or her throughout the process to get that product specified and to get it specified properly. And by the time we're getting the guide spec, we've already made that decision. Now, granted, I know as a product rep, those of you who are product reps want, you're out there to sell your product, and so I can understand that you want to see the guide spec as a marketing piece as well, but just be careful how you use that. Just make sure it's technical and not a fluff marketing piece. I mean, if I see something out there that says like heavy-duty frame that will resist deterioration and remain beautiful for years to come, well, that's marketing. You don't need to say that in your guide spec. I don't want to see that. That's just stuff that I have to go through and take out and pull away from. Just say heavy-duty frame. That's really all it needs to be in there. You can put the beautiful notes somewhere else in your marketing piece, but not in that spec. Just remember that it's a technical specification, and it can be used as a marketing piece or an educational tool for you to give to the architect, but not necessarily just a marketing piece to try to sell the product.
That I heard you laughing. Can you talk a little bit about how you use guides, how you use the guide specs and what you do?
Well, it's interesting, but let me talk a little bit about, from a manufacturing standpoint, that for all the product reps on the phone that have no control over what their manufactured guide specs look like, because that's a commonplace thing that I don't think a lot of architects understand. When that person walks into Dave's office and all that fluff is in there, the person that's handing him that piece of paper, the person that emailed him that, those of us in the field that are actually dealing with the architects, typically are not the ones that wrote those things. Now, we have input as much as we can, but there's somebody in a marketing department that gets paid to make it look as pretty as possible, and sometimes the technical piece and the marketing piece, there's a lot of intermixing because those folks are trying to justify their existence as well. So as a product rep, I will say to the other ones out there, one of the services that I think is important for us to provide is feedback to our marketing departments to make them understand what's fluff, what's marketing, and what's actually technical information. And then the other piece of the puzzle is we can gain a tremendous amount of credibility when we stand in front of the architect and say, okay, here's the fluff, here's the real stuff. And by the way, I always try to go, when I talk to somebody like Nina or Dave, who are both friends of mine, and I consider them good architects, as I talk to them, I will say, here's a competitor's product that's similar, and here's how it's similar, and here's how it's not. And then they can decide whether that fits into their project and it's truly as much of an equal as possible, or it's not. But the bottom line is, I'm trying to represent the industry, not just my product, because that makes me the trusted advisor.
Excellent point. Excellent point.
Yeah, so I would just recommend that you talk to your technical and marketing group to improve your company's guide spec, just as that said. And if you need help on how to make sure you get that information, then ask the architects you're working for, how can I better improve this guide spec that'll be more beneficial to you as a tool.
Excellent. Rob, have we had any questions?
We did actually have a comment from Chris online here. I'm going to read it for you guys and ask you to comment on it at the end. He says, a criticism of the architectural community in recent years is the lack of actual quote-unquote specifiers and the replacement of project architects who borrow the company accepted master spec and do not do their due diligence on researching the applicability of the spec to the current job. Likewise, the obsoleteness of the spec writer has led to a learning process for younger project architects who also seem to be the only ones showing up for the lunch and learns and not the firm partners or principals. Are lunch and learns going to go away? Are spec writers considered a lost breed? He mentioned that Dave's a great spec guy, but it kind of seems like he may be a dying breed. And it seems like that's more the reason of the disconnect of the specific spec item confusion than the actual spec format or content itself.
All good points. Dave, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Yeah, that's a loaded. I am a recent independent specifier, and the firm that I was with decided that they wanted to actually, yes, go that route and have their own project architects write their own specifications. So I was sort of left out in the cold and became my own specifier. But I'm finding out that more and more firms, thank goodness, are going to independent specifiers to write their specs, which is coming back to a good thing. Now, as a product representative, that still is not really good for them, because they're trying to find out who to talk to at that firm that can give them information on a specific project, or even generally who to talk to go in and talk about their new products or what have you. And that is very difficult, and and I feel for the product reps out there that are trying to find out how to get into those firms. There's not that go-to specifier anymore. And typically me as an independent specifier, I'm getting involved pretty much well after the project has started and working in towards that end. But it is a difficult situation, and I don't think the specifiers are necessarily a dying breed. It's just changing a little bit, and I'm not too sure that change has yet been totally fulfilled or realized.
I would generally really tend to agree with you, and I'm actually moving from being an independent specifier, and about 6 months ago I moved into managing the specifications for a large architectural firm. So I'm going the opposite direction. And I always encouraged and I still do at this point, anytime a manufacturer product rep, if they're coming in to speak to me now, they pretty much know who's going to be writing the specifications, but we do have multiple specifiers in our firm. But I always encouraged other people to ask who was going to be writing the specifications, because if the product manufacturer reps or architectural reps ask that question, it at least starts the dialogue of thinking about it, and that it closes the loop, because I wanted, as an independent, to also be in front of those manufacturers' reps, because I wanted to know what you had told them, because at one point in time, a product manufacturer went in, visited with a young architect, and then that architect neglected to tell the specifier that we were changing products. And then when the product went out to bid, nobody had checked it, unfortunately, which wasn't necessarily anybody but the project architect's fault. But then they came back and said, well, why isn't this product in there? We spent lots of time and money and hours working with you, and we're not in the spec. And so it's almost closing the loop, and it's everybody's responsibility to do that. So I would encourage you to always ask. And Dave, as an independent now, I realize your time is a little bit more at a premium, but I'm certain that you would be happy, while you may not be able to give specifics about the project, I'm sure you would be happy to speak with anybody to know what they've told the project architects on those projects.
Well, not only happy, I would welcome it to the nth degree, because that's only going to help my job be easier in writing the specification for a particular project. So I even encourage the architects that I work with to send me the product reps as they've talked to, send them my way so I can talk to them as well. So as a product rep out there, you may want to ask that question too when you're going in to talk to an architect, is who's writing your specifications. And if it isn't independent, I'm sure that any independent specifier would welcome talking to the product rep on any particular project.
Excellent. Thad, anything to add on that one?
Oh, I could talk on this one for about 2 hours. Let me highlight some points. Let me start by making a very bold statement. And let me back up a little bit for history's sake. Most of the changes we've seen are the result of two things: the downturn in the economy from 2008 to 2011, where architectural firms did a lot of crazy things just to survive, because the money wasn't coming in, because our industry was down 40 to 50 to 60%. So there were major changes in offices, and for those of you that are product reps out there, if you haven't seen that, then you need to get more involved in the industry and associations, AIA and CSI and USGBC, and start to understand what's going on the other side of the fence. And then the other piece of the puzzle is the advent of the technology that we touched on earlier, which is master spec and VSD, and services that, from an owner's perspective, in an architectural office, they're seeing this as a way to eliminate labor and perhaps make them, their hope, I'm sure, is that they'd be more effective, because now they have 20 people writing specifications because they have these tools that they can use, this technology that they paid for, as opposed to having that one wise and old curmudgeon sitting in the corner of the room that knows everything there is to know about products and all their history, and that's one of the pieces that we're at risk of losing. So while we look at this, and here's what's happened, let me just make the bold statement, which is when there's a lawsuit, they don't look at the drawings, they look at the specifications. And the quality of specifications that comes out of the office because of these changes is under flux right now, and there's a lot of wide and very different types of documents coming out in the industry. And so there's a tremendous amount of change. Now, I see that as a good thing in the sense that that makes me even more valuable as a product rep who knows my product and knows the history of my industry. You know, I start with data mining. Some of the top firms that I have contact with, I make regular contact with those folks, and I'm trying to get in front of them at a box lunch and other presentations where I can be in front of them at an association meeting so that these younger people coming up understand that I have this knowledge and give me the opportunity to be the go-to guy as things go forward. Because, and then the other piece of the puzzle I mentioned earlier, which is know the master spec language, know the BSD language in your particular division, in your particular product line, because they're generic and the nomenclature is different, like Nina touched on earlier, probably much different than what we're used to saying in our industry, because we have all these shortcuts that we have and we have this familiarity. The people that put these things together are technological people that may not know our industry at all. So when I'm in front of a group in any kind of a box lunch setting or any kind of a situation where I'm talking about a project, the more I know about what they're looking at and the more I know about how they're receiving information, the more effective I can be in communicating what I want to communicate to help them solve the problem and get through the process of doing the best they can to have a good specification out there. I'm going to shut up now.
No, you're good. They knew that it would take three of us to fill an hour in talking about specs, so that's why they invited us. Or maybe they just knew that we would limit each other because we all feel very strongly about the need for good specifications. So I think this is really, really good. And I'm not in any way wrapping this up, but I did want to get to the last little bullet on this slide, and then we can certainly continue this discussion. But our last bullet is that if you don't have a guide specification, or if you're looking to retool yours, one good way of doing that is engaging a certified construction specifier, and there are a number of them out there that specialize in writing manufacturer's guide specs and can really guide you through, because most of them actually do prepare project specifications, and so they know what we're looking for, and there are lots and lots of hot buttons. So I would encourage you that if you don't have somebody in-house that really is specialized in doing this, and as we've already touched on, your marketing department may not be the best equipped to prepare the technical information, is go out and find a certified construction specifier, which you can certainly do through CSI. They have connections and can find people to assist you in preparing that technical documentation.
I might also want to add that many times that CCS specifier would be an independent specifier. They're more likely to, you can tell me if I'm wrong, Nina, but they're more likely to be the ones capable of doing that because they're not working for a firm per se. And another avenue to find those folks is through SCIP, which is Specifiers, Consultants, and Independent Practice, who will list them. And as Nina said, there are some of those folks out there that actually specialize in writing manufacturer specifications.
I would agree with you, Dave, that most of those that write manufacturers' guide specs are independents. But if you know somebody that's in an office and you have something and you have a question on your guide spec, most of us are more than happy, because we're very passionate about this and are happy to talk with you and give you some guidance, and then we'll get you in touch with people that if you do need to write it. We're a very small community, as the question earlier mentioned, kind of sort of led into, is we're a very small community and we know each other and we like to help each other out. We are a treasure trove of information, good and bad, and so we know people and can get you in touch with the right people if we're not the right person to help you. So please.
That's right, and I actually did that way some time ago. In fact, for Thad's company, National JIP, I helped them start a guide spec for their company as well, and just did it gratis because I knew the person that was coming to me for help, and we just went over things and a few lunches, and it was quite helpful. So you can easily find that as well. So it's a good point, Nina.
Thad, I know that both Dave and I had worked with National JIP, and so I'm pretty certain that you may have something else to add on this as well.
If
Or he may have run away from. Oh, okay.
No. If nothing else, it's nice to be able to present a specification. When I send mine out, regardless of the situation, when I send it out, I do so with confidence because I know I've had professional CSI people look at it, and they approved it, and they reviewed it, and they felt comfortable with it. So I can go forward with confidence, knowing that it's going to be well received. Now, I don't just send it out blindly. It's not a tool that I use as a telemarketing tool per se. It's one of those things that I start the relationship, I have a conversation, we have a project-specific information session or something specific about a product, and then it's provided. It's not a blast marketing tool. I don't know how well that would be received, and maybe one or both of you can talk about it. It's not something that just appears in your box. It's something that is the next step in a relationship.
That's right. I mean, I don't see it as any kind of blast marketing tool at all, and would probably typically ignore it if it came in that way.
I think that's true, because most of the time when we're looking for things, it may be during a normal 8 to 5 work day, but when we're really looking for good guide specs, it seems to always happen at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can't quite pick up the phone and call Thad and say, hey Thad, what do I do about this? So it's important to provide your guide specs also, not just as something that you hand to someone that you're meeting face to face, but you may want to consider making it available. And I know that one hot button seems to be for specifiers, and it's always a question that's out there, is do I provide my guide specs as a Word document, or do I provide it as a PDF, because I certainly don't want my competitors to copy it. And I personally am of the opinion that if somebody wants to do something bad with your guide spec, they're going to do it. They can retype it just as easily. If that's your big concern, then I'm not certain that you're really moving forward in the industry and helping get the good information out there. Make it easier for the specifier to use it and to cut and paste from it is my personal opinion. But I understand that sometimes you don't want to be giving away free services. I understand that we're all in business to make money, and I think that that's an important thing. So consider how you're providing it and when you provide it.
Can I just jump in here for a minute where that's concerned? And I completely agree with you, Nina. I will gladly give a Word document to anyone that wants it, because in my mind, if I worked for a competitor of National Gypsum at one point, and we had a product that we felt we owned, quote unquote, we were the first one to the market, and National Gypsum actually came out with a product that was similar to it, and there was a tremendous uproar in my company about, oh no, somebody else, we have competition. And I actually saw it as a very good thing. The more competition that's out there, the more we improve the industry. A company with the power and the prestige of National Gypsum entering that arena, I said this will actually double or triple our sales, and it actually did. It was one of those things where the entire industry is better. And you mentioned it earlier when you talked about how specifications are a small community and you all help each other out. That's one of the things I love about being able to go to a quality specifier, is I know that they'll talk to their friends as well, and they'll share it, and that makes our whole industry better. And after all, isn't that why we're here?
That's right. You're not selling the specification. You're selling the product, and the more you can get that product in front of people in however many ways it is, that's going to help you out. So the more and easier that guide specification can be used, the better chance you're going to have in selling a product.
Good point. Rob, any questions or comments that have come in? I've been seeing a little bit of activity on Twitter, but I'm not fast enough at reading that, so that's good to know that people are tweeting about this session.
No, nothing major. We did have a question. Warren typed in. He said, "You can actually call Pat at 3 a.m. He's nocturnal."
Not sure what to do with that one. So I think why don't we move to the next slide, and we'll get me out of that uncomfortable place. As we mentioned, this conversation today really is kind of a little bit of a teaser. As you notice, the three of us probably can talk for hours on the topic of specifications, guide specifications, product representation, being a trusted advisor. But one of the lead-ins to this is that we do have, CSI has 2 events that are coming up. And these are in reverse order, so don't let it confuse you here. The first one that's up on the screen right now is talking about the Guide Specifications for Product Representatives Workshop, which will be held May 8th in Atlanta, and registration is currently open. That presentation is going to be presented by yours truly, and I'm looking forward. It's going to be a whole day event for writing specifications, but the topic is really to help product representatives understand guide specifications. So we have a lot of fun activities, interactive activities that we're going to be participating in, because while I'm passionate about specs, I realize that specs are not really the sexy part of our industry. They're kind of the red-headed stepchild, and so consequently I want to make this session a really fun session and a fun day and a fun event for everybody. So I hope you'll consider registering, and it does. I know that CSI is going to be, and I guess it's a program that's been going on, and I apologize for not being that familiar with it. I know that as a certified specifier, I'm required to maintain continuing education hours, and it is my understanding to maintain the CCPR. You also have to have continuing education hours, and you can get 7 of the 24 that you're required to get over 3 years. You can get 7 of those all on May 8th. So hope you'll consider joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to CSI about that event or reach out to myself. And the next event is...
Oh, and also, actually, before we move on to that, we did have couple quick questions that came in, Nina. Warren was asking, where do you go for your product information? Do you value your local product rep if you know who they are more than the company's website?
I'll jump in on that one first, and I think I value all the information. And a lot of times, if I know who to call, that's going to be the place that I'm going to start. Because, again, this goes to the trusted advisor. And I can call somebody up and get a 5-minute answer, or I can get a 5-hour discussion, which I probably am not going to be able to get that information from the website. If it's somebody that I don't know, or a product that I don't know and don't really have a good connection of where to start, information on a website is certainly a really good place, but that goes back to my earlier comment about making sure that you know the audience that you're talking to, because your website needs to contain not only the pretty pictures, the technical information, it really has to be all things to everybody, so that at 3 o'clock in the morning when I can't call, that it is available and at least gets me started. Dave, would you like to add on to that one?
Yeah, I would agree with that. But one thing about the websites, and something that I'd love to see on a manufacturer's website, is a way to find my local representative.
Yeah.
I just, that's the best way for me. I'll go to one website and I'll look through it, and many times there's a lot of websites that are hard to navigate through and find the exact product you want to, or a good comparison. So I will find the information on the website, but many times it doesn't say which product is the best to use in a certain situation. So I want to talk to that technical person, and I would prefer, rather than a, an 800 technical line nationally, to have a local rep that I can go talk to, and then in the future, I know who that local rep is, and I can go straight to him and find out, and even meet with him if need be, to discuss a specific project. And a website that has that find information on it is invaluable to me.
I absolutely agree, and I think that it's those relationships that you start to build, and I may call somebody even if it's not their product or even a competitor's product, if it's an associated product or an accessory product. If I happen to think that that trusted advisor is going to have some information, because your network is amazing and the people that you know, so I use those people as a conduit to get to things that I need to know as well. So it's not just about knowing your product as well. Thad, do you have anything you want to add on that one?
Just a quick comment for the product reps out there to make sure that they understand that, an architect has 50 or 60 or 70 products they need to be familiar with and have a general working knowledge of how they interact in the building that they're trying to put together. As product reps, the value that we truly bring is the up-to-date industry information and those extra things that both of you have just touched on. We have people that in our industry that are concerned about, what's a product rep going to look like in years, and everything's going to be automated, and there's too many computers, and they're going to make us obsolete. I think that they make me more valuable, because no matter how much we write about what's going on today, obviously you folks are interested in what the history of this product has done, how it's performed over time. It hasn't, whatever comes out of the organization, regardless of what it is, because of liability and the litigious society that we live in, there's going to be some massaging of the words that are written and not the real world information that we can provide as product reps. And so when Dave calls me or Nina calls me and says, hey, here's a situation that I have, a couple things happen. One is I typically know what's going on in the marketplace around my industry, and that information can help them make solid decisions about how a product is going to perform long term, and not just with what's written on the website. So, I think that if nothing else, is the reason why we need to have those solid relationships. And I appreciate people like Dave that are looking for the local rep as well. A lot of companies, ours included, has a fantastic tech line with wonderful people that know a lot about our industry. But I love having the interaction with somebody that I can go out and physically talk to face to face. This is still a people business.
Agreed. Rob, did you say you had another question or no?
Yep, we do have one more, and then while you're answering that, I'll go on to the next slide here. But Charisse actually posed this question, or brought it to our attention, that came from Twitter. Which industry standard specs and/or spec services should manufacturers pay to be in? And she goes on to point out that some of the independent representatives struggle with the costs to get into industry standard specs.
Whew. Wow. Charisse, great question.
Yes.
Impossible to answer in the 11 minutes we have left.
My quick answer to that is all
Thank
of them.
you.
All of them. Really, I know that's a bad answer, because many manufacturers can't afford to be in all of those things, but the ones that Nina mentioned at the beginning, BSD, RCOM, spec text, those are really the big three. There's some other good ones that are out there too that you need to be in. And then there's other places such as search engines and so forth that you can go to. I really hate to say in this forum which ones are the best necessarily, but there's a lot of good ones out there, and some are actually free if you can get in to find those as well. And but I, as a specifier, tend to use all of them to some degree.
Yes.
So it's very difficult to say which ones you should get into. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
You did a great job with answering that, Dave, because I agree with exactly what you're saying, is you really kind of need to be everywhere and you need to be everything to everybody, which doesn't really help you much. But going back to something that Thad mentioned earlier, if you're not in one of those, or if you can't afford to be in one of those, and that's a paid subscription or however it is, you want to make sure that you know the language that's in there, so that as you're assisting a specifier or a design team, that you're able to equate that and know what those masters say, so that you can help them build your product into it. Because I have heard it many, many, many times, and have threatened many, many people that have said, well, if you're not in fill in the blank of the specification service, then I'm not going to spec you. And as I've been known to say, all of the master commercially available guide specs, be them free or paid subscriptions, are truly guide specs. They're not perfect and they're not infallible either. And so it's probably most important that someone knows what's in those specs, to Thad's point earlier, rather than necessarily having to be in all of them.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and I know when I was a young cub in the industry, I thought the same thing. You know, if the product wasn't in master spec, let's say, I wasn't going to spec it because it must not be good if it's not in there. But I've come to learn over the years that that's not true at all. In fact, I get to the point now where I'll be working with a product and say, well, why is that not in master spec? Because it's an excellent product. I specify it all the time. So that's not really a good indication. So yes, Nina's right. You just make sure that I think a good specifier will know that even if your product's not in there, it's still the product to use.
Good point. Dave and Thad, would you guys talk about the academies a little bit as we wrap this up?
Yeah, let me start out, Dave, and the reason I say that is from a manufacturer standpoint. I would assume, based on the conversation or the topic that we have today, that the audience is probably heavily weighted towards product reps and people in the manufacturing end of the business. We have a thing coming up called the Academies. It's a little over a week away, actually, the 16th through the 18th in San Francisco. Let me just touch a little bit about guide specs as related to this particular piece. One of the things that we've divided into two tracks. One of the things we're going to do is train newer employees. So if you're sitting on the phone right now and you have employees that are fairly new and they might not know the right person to call on, they might not have a good idea of how to work a data mining operation, they might not know the right things about social etiquette. Those are all things that when we get into this industry, it takes us 24 to 36 months to learn, as a rule, to be effective, truly effective in our territories. You know, CSI provides this workshop in hopes of helping reduce that from that 36-month to that, that 12 to 18-month time frame with this type of an organization, where we have two tracks. One that shows how to do that for those younger reps that are in 1 to 5 years. It's heavily weighted towards beginning information, helping get started. The instructors are there to basically understand that people, need a chance to get started and be able to move forward. How to do a box lunch, how to prepare for a box lunch, how to follow up from a box lunch. Things as simple as that. Then the second track is the one I'm really excited about. We made several changes this year. The PR2 track basically is more for the advanced rep, those folks that have been in 5 to 8 to 20 years. Where we have an ethics class where we're basically going to have some professionals in the industry that says, okay, here's the business ethics that we work on a regular basis, and we encourage people when they pre-register to send their questions in, and we'll address the questions. It's more of a panel track. We're going to have a lot of panels in that area where we have people sitting in front of the room, people like Dave and Nina that have the information and the expertise in the industry. We give them the opportunity to answer questions from the audience as well as have a small overview. And one of those specifically that ties into this call is we're going to have a guide specification, bring your spec to work type class, where we encourage everyone who's attending that class to have their guide spec from their company, to bring it in, to this workshop. We're going to have 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of instruction where we talk about what a good guide spec should look like and a bad guide spec some problems where we might be able to identify things that would turn people off in the professional industry. And then we're actually going to join with the Contract Specification Academy track, and we're going to sit down and we're going to say Dave's group is going to be in the room as well, and we're going to sit down one-on-one or one-on-two, however it works out from the numbers. We don't have the total registration yet. We're going to basically sit down and have those people get their red pens out and go, okay, here's what I like about your spec, here's what I don't like about your spec. Here's some information that you could take back to your marketing department to be a little more effective in communicating what you want to communicate to make your company be more effective in the design community. So from a manufacturer standpoint, if I wasn't going to come for any other reason, that's the one class I would want to be there for, so I could take the offering that I send out to design professionals every day who have a vested interest in not telling me maybe something, or they might not have the time to tell me. I get one-on-one discussions with a specifier to be able to sit down and say, okay, here's the message that you're sending. Is that really what you want to say? Or here's the message that you're sending. This is excellent. And then that's something that I plan to take back to my company and just make us more effective in the way we communicate. And Dave, I'll let you talk to what a specifier might get out of this particular session.
Well, once again, as we've talked about in this session today, is what we'll get out of it is how best we can help the product rep to get a better guide spec, and then from that point, then the product rep will then come back to us with good guide specs, and we'll know how they operate. We'll know what they're looking for and what they want to have us see as well. So beyond that, I just wanted to briefly mention, we're running out of time here, but I just wanted to briefly mention the other 2 tracks that we have in the Academy. We have, as Thad mentioned, we have a Construction Specifier Academy, and we also have a Construction Administration Academy. Many of these sessions overlap in some regard, so even if you're a product representative, there may be some other things in one of the other 2 tracks that might appeal to you, and you have the option to attend because you sign up for one track. Doesn't mean you can't slide over and choose something from another track. So it's a good opportunity for networking with the specifiers and the contract administrators, and it's a good opportunity to learn other things from the other side of the aisle, so to speak. So I would encourage you, all of those who have not signed up yet and might want to think about it, to do so. Plus, it's in San Francisco, a nice city to visit.
The final registration deadline is the 9th, which I think is tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
So it's coming up real quick, and so don't think about it too long. But I've had the pleasure of attending, and I would encourage anybody who has the ability to go. It's well worth the event fund, because you really do get to visit with a smaller group. It's a very one-on-one, very intense couple of days, but I've never heard anybody walk away disappointed. It's a great event. So certainly encourage you to consider coming out to Atlanta in May. And do we have any final questions or any wrap-up that we need to do, Rob?
I don't believe so, although I will say I don't know if Shree's posted this a second time and she just didn't hear it. Could you mention those top firms again that a manufacturer should look at subscribing to?
Well, I think as Dave says, we're kind of we're not wanting to necessarily say they should subscribe to any one in particular, or because I think there are a lot of, you have to figure out where the best bang for your buck is, really. And I think that many of us are more than happy to talk about that offline, but I don't know that it's probably appropriate as part of this webinar.
All right.
And if you go to CSINet, the website, there are some specification systems mentioned in there that you can purchase, and I know there's others out there. You can probably just Google them and find them as well. So, but they're all good. I mean, there's nothing really bad with any of them, and
Exactly. I think that's a really good point, Dave. That they all have their pluses, they all have their minuses, and you have to figure out what meets your needs as a product rep or as a subscriber to what your goals are and how best to achieve that with the dollars that are available. Well, super. I really appreciate everybody for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you either at the academies or at the workshop in Atlanta, or if not at either of those locations, we'll look forward to seeing you at Construct in September. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Fantastic.